Good morning. It's good to see so many people registered. You all should have received an email yesterday with a link to a PDF. It has all the titles we're going to be presenting today. Also, all the titles are loaded on our website. You can find them under our hot list. It's under Adult, Dewey Divas, and then the name of the selection list is Underrepresented Voices. We will be sending a follow-up email after the webinar with links to the PDFs and the hot list. So if you missed it from yesterday, don't worry about it. You'll get another one today. A recording of this event will be made available to all registrants. Today, Whitehots is pleased to be able to host this exclusive Dewey Divas and Dudes presentation on books that reflect underrepresented voices. You'll be hearing from some of our favorite publisher reps. Now, more than ever, it's important to highlight underrepresented voices from neurodivergence, LGBTQ, ethnic minority groups, and so on. Every voice tells their own story. So without further ado, we can start the presentation. And our first presenter is Rosalyn Steele.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Rosalyn Steele from HarperCollins Canada. Just double checking that I turned on my mic. I'll be starting off the presentation with several new titles from Black authors. The first few were from our winter list, so they're available now, and then I'll follow up with a few that are coming in the summer. First up is Gutter Child by J.L. Richardson. It's a debut novel from J.L., who's the executive director of the Festival of Literary Diversity, or Fold Festival, and the book's columnist on CBC Radio's Q. She has previously written a memoir called The Stone Thrower, A Daughter's Lesson, A Father's Life, based on her relationship with her father, CFL quarterback Chuck Ely. This novel is just stunning. It's set in an imagined world of disadvantage and injustice, where the nation is divided into mainland, where privileged colonialists live, and the heavily policed gutter. There, the indigenous Sosi people are forced to buy their freedom from their debts to society, a monetary amount assigned as restitution for their part in the war that they lost to protect their homeland. Most gutter children are born into a debt that will take most of their lives to repay. We see this world through the eyes of young 15-year-old Elamina, who was born in the gutter but raised as part of a privileged mainland family as part of a social experiment. After her mainland mother dies, she is sent to the Livingstone Academy, where along with other gutter children, she prepares for a life of servitude. Navigating the new sets of rules and expectations at the academy, Elamina makes friends and tries to deal with the complicated politics of being from two worlds. When her life takes an unexpected turn, she has to decide if she has the courage to hold on to what she holds dear and risk defying the system that has been manipulating her life from the start. Even though the world JL has created is fictional, the topics and themes she touches upon are not, like the Child Welfare Act, residential schools. This book is very current and relevant and would be a great choice for book clubs or anyone who loved the Nickel Boys, the Illegal, or the Marrow Thieves. The next book is How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House by Sherry Jones. This is a much buzzed about Own Voices debut novel from an award-winning short story writer. Sherry has won the Commonwealth Prize for her short fiction, and this book is shaping up to be an award contender too. Zoomer, the Globe and Mail, CBC Books, the Girly Book Club have all raved about the book, and it was named one of Oprah's 55 most anticipated books of 2021 and named a Good Morning America Book Club choice. It's set in 1980s in Barbados and weaves back and forth in time as the book follows four characters desperate to escape the poverty and violence that lurks behind the scenes in paradise. The main character, Layla, is a hair braider living with an often abusive husband. A murder takes place on the day that she gives birth to her daughter, a crime committed by her husband. The story looks at what happens in the aftermath of the murder and the next months and how they change her life in fundamental ways. It really offers a great look into the life that happens beyond the tourist beaches, where glamorous beach homes are just blocks away from decrepit hospitals and slums. It's really hard to believe that this is the author's first full novel. Her writing has been compared to Zadie Jones and Marlon James. The title, How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House, derives from a cautionary yarn that Layla's grandmother, Wilma, tells to convey the danger of disobedience. It has elements of a crime thriller, but also offers a nuanced exploration of race and class and the violence that is passed down from generation to generation. The Kindest Lie opens in 2008. That's their next title, by Nancy Johnson. It opens at a watch party in Chicago where a young, successful African-American engineer named Ruth is celebrating with her husband as Barack Obama wins the presidential election. Their future looks bright until Xavier, her husband, starts pushing to have a family. There's something Ruth has never told him that might jeopardize their future, that she had a baby at age 17 and then gave her son up for adoption. Ruth can't shake the questions about her son, so she heads back to her hometown in Indiana to find answers. There she observes a city struggling with poverty after the closure of the biggest employer in the area and racism on the rise. Ruth gets little help in her quest from her mother and her brother Eli, who believe that the past should stay in the past and remind Ruth of the sacrifices that they made for her. Things get even more complicated when Ruth meets and befriends Midnight, a young white boy desperate for connection and with a troubling past of his own. The Kindest Lie confronts racial barriers, injustice, class and wealth disparity through a well-developed, very engaging personal story. This would be a great book club pick, lots to discuss, and about issues in the news daily. So the next slide is, sorry about that random book cover there on that other slide. This features 4 books that are coming up on our summer list that I'm really excited about. Love and Color was a it was a bestseller in the UK when it was published last year and will be out this April. It's it's a short story collection, very accomplished, intelligent, and entertaining. The author is very passionate about centering her stories on people of color finding love and fulfillment. All of the stories retell myths and folk tales from around the world, but with a particular focus on West African stories. And using those traditional tales as jumping off points, the author explores feminism, class conflict, domestic violence, and many other important issues while still making sure that every story has a happy ending. The Love Songs of W.B. Du Bois. It's a breakout debut novel from a highly praised poet. Her last book of poetry, The Age of Phyllis, was longlisted for the National Book Award. This book traces the roots of an American family from arriving on a slave ship right through modern times. We try to use the term epic masterpiece sparingly but there really is no other way to describe this book and fully do it justice. What she's achieved in these pages is both epic, both in the sheer breadth of the tale that she is telling, but also to the depth in which she grants us access to these characters' lives. It's a big brick of a book at over 800 pages, but it's full of familial drama, deep humor, personal discovery, and sorrow that will keep readers turning the pages. Island Queen is a beautifully written, sweeping historical novel based on the incredible true life story of Dorothy Kirwan Thomas, a free woman of color who rose up from slavery to become one of the wealthiest and most powerful landowners in the colonial West Indies. This is Vanessa Riley's first commercial novel, but she has a strong following from readers through her historic romance novels that depict powerful characters of color. When the Reckoning Comes by Latanya McQueen. This is a thriller for fans of Jordan Peele's Get Out, the Netflix show Antebellum, or Alyssa Cole's When No One Is Watching. It's about a woman who has returned to her southern town for a wedding at a former plantation turned resort, who finds herself caught up in a horror when vengeful ghosts of tortured slaves rise up to get revenge on the mainly white, rich West wedding guests, many of whom are descendants of slave owners. Next up, I have 2 nonfiction titles, also from Black authors, by Georgina Lawton, who's a Black journalist who was raised by 2 white parents in the English suburbs with no explanation as to why she looked different or access to Black culture. Her darker skin and kinky hair made her a target of prejudice. When she tried talking to her parents about it, she was told that her appearance was due to a throwback gene and the subject was changed. This book is the result of her desire to know more about her cultural background. When her father died unexpectedly young, Georgina took a DNA test, which revealed a secret about her parentage that she wasn't expecting. She ended up leaving England to live in Black communities around the world, the US, the UK, Nicaragua, Cuba, Dominican Republic, South Africa, and Morocco, to explore her identity and what it meant to live and navigate the world as a Black woman. The book has themes of race and identity, but also asks difficult questions about love, shame, grief, and prejudice, and the emotional journey of forming one's identity. And Sure, I'll Be Your Black Friend. This is by Ben Philippe. He's a Canadian author from Montreal who's currently living in New York City. It's not just a memoir, it's a series of essays that chronicles Ben's life that oscillate between humorous and heartfelt. It describes how Ben has been the Black friend to his white friends throughout his life and how that has ultimately enriched both of their lives in many ways. Connecting to readers on both sides, this is the type of books that can appeal to many with its timely message of connection, understanding, and friendship. His writing is sharp and engaging, but there's also several chapters throughout that will make you laugh until you cry with his expert play on words and hilarious voice, very much in the vein of Samantha Irby. My next two books are set in the vibrant Indian immigrant communities, one in Toronto, the other in London, England. Hannah Khan Carries On is the second book by Toronto-based author Uzma Jalaluddin, who you might remember from her delightful debut, Aisha at Last. This book is perfect for fans of You've Got Mail, but instead of competing bookstore owners, this book follows two characters who work at competing halal restaurants in Toronto. Hannah is just working at her family restaurant, but she's trying to, part-time, she's trying to break into journalism, particularly radio broadcasting. And she also hosts a podcast and hopes that that might be her ticket into that world if she can make it a success. She has an online friendship with one of her podcast followers that might be turning into something more. But the restaurant is not doing well, and when a restaurant opens up just down the street, which happens to be owned by an irritatingly handsome man who has already rubbed Hannah the wrong way, it might mean the end for her family's livelihood. As she struggles to build her career, save her family business, and help her neighborhood, a visit from a distant cousin and aunt from India reveals some long-held secrets that might change everything. It deals with racism and discussions about other diversity issues, and which is what I love about Uzma's books, that make them so much deeper than other rom-coms. And next is The Reading List by Sarah Nisha Adams. This is a novel about how an unexpected encounter and a list of library books help forge an unlikely friendship between two very different people. A widower who's worried about his bookworm granddaughter, and Alicia, who's an anxious teen working at the local library for the summer. She finds a crumpled list of books inside a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird and decides to read every book on the list, one after the other. Each story transports her from the painful realities that she's facing at home. And when Mukesh arrives at the library, desperate to forge a connection with his granddaughter, Alicia passes along the reading list, hoping it will offer him the same comfort. So it's a heartfelt story about the power of books and a love letter to our best known novels, again, set in a multicultural London neighborhood. The Removed is a First Nations author, Brandon Hobson, who's, and this timely Own Voices novel addresses police violence, First Nation issues, grief, and family connection. His last book was a National Book Award nominee, and we're hoping for great things for this one. The story in this takes place leading up to the 15th anniversary of the death of Ray Ray Achota, who was murdered by a police officer as a teen. The family is gathering as they deal with the lingering grief over their loss and coming together for a memorial, which also coincides with the Cherokee National Holiday. Maria, Ray Ray's mother, has been struggling with depression and dealing with her husband, who has early onset Alzheimer's. Their adult daughter, Sonia, leads a life of solitude, interrupted by spells of romantic obsession that lead her into dysfunctional relationships. And brother Edgar fled home long ago, turning to drugs to dull his feelings of alienation. But now a suicide attempt has left him in the mysterious darkening land, a place between the living and the dead. So the spiritual world plays a big role in this book, as does the connection to nature. It alternates in different points of view and really touches upon the kind of the shared history and the dislocation of the Cherokee people. It's a very thoughtful and thought-provoking book that stays with you. Next up, I have a few books that speak to the LGBT that are from LGBT Voices. Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers. This is an Own Voices debut with a love story about a woman who wakes up in Las Vegas after a night of drinking, married to a woman that she doesn't know. It's perfect for fans of Queenie and Red, White, and Blue. This book is funny and thoughtful. It's about being young, making mistakes, being Black. Lots of great talking points for book clubs. Like the protagonist, Grace, the author is Black and queer and has written about her own experience from her own experience to create a love story between diverse characters that we often don't see represented in fiction. While the main focus of the book is on romance, the book also explores themes of discrimination and burnout, job uncertainty in a difficult economy, making this a book in which millennial and Gen Zers will especially identify with. Next is After Parties by Anthony Vesna-So. This is an intersectional queer collection. The stories in this collection address the complexity of life for the LGBT community and the experiences of first-generation Americans, making it the perfect read for fans of Garth Greenwell and Alexander Chee. Anthony was already an acclaimed fiction writer and is well known in the literary community. He's been published in The New Yorker, received a Lambda Literary Fellowship, won the Joyce Carol Oates Award. But sadly, he died in late 2020, so we're actually publishing this book posthumously. His death was covered in the Toronto Star, and based on the reviews that After Parties has been receiving, this book is going to be remembered as a legacy of an author gone far too soon. The Night Always Comes by Billy Lawton. So this book speaks to socioeconomic struggles, and it's told over the course of 2 days. It captures anxieties about our changing world. It's set in Portland, Oregon, a city transformed by gentrification. The novel sensitively explores issues of working class greed, class division, home ownership, and mental health. The main character is 30 and has been working multiple jobs in order to try to save enough for a down payment to buy the house that she, her mother, and her developmentally challenged brother have been renting for years. But her mother backs out on her promise to co-sign the mortgage, and she only has 2 days before the first payment is due, and she has to resort to increasingly desperate measures to try to get that money. Flashbacks explains why she made some of the choices she did. It's a lyrical, bittersweet look at working class people who are doing well enough to not qualify for help, but still not well enough to grab the American dream. The Last Exiles by Anne Shin. Anne is an award-winning Korean-Canadian documentary filmmaker based in Toronto. This novel is inspired by her work on the award-winning documentary Defector, which chronicled the incredible stories of those who escaped violence and oppression in North Korea. The novel offers a rare and fascinating glimpse at daily life inside North Korea and the dangerous criminal networks that exist on the border with China. It's about two students who fall in love, but Jin is from a poor family in the north, and when he returns home on a school break and realizes his family is starving, he tries to steal some food to help them and gets caught and sent to a work camp. He ends up escaping over the border, and Suja, who loves him, follows. So it's about their struggles. It's beautifully told, and another beautiful story of love, exile, family, and identity. I've Been Buried Under Years of Dust is a memoir about parenting an extremely autistic child that will appeal to readers of The Reason I Jump and Look at Me in the Eye. The book stands apart in that it contains the writings of Emily, who was born with nonverbal autism. She had a breakthrough after undergoing the controversial facilitated communication treatment, which enabled her to communicate for the first time in a format other than a one-word reply or gesture. The title of the book, I Have Been Buried Under Years of Dust, is how she described her life prior to the breakthrough. And the mother, Valerie, presents a compelling argument as to why she's convinced a facilitated communication worked in Emily's case, and shares her own experiences working with other families affected with autism. The book includes Emily's poetry, which is both lyrical and emotional, but also offers a unique commentary on her world and ours from the outsider perspective of an autistic individual. And my final book is actually two books. The Silent Night is the newest book, and it's by an author who's part of the deaf community. She has a condition where she's slowly losing her hearing and has been since her 20s. She works as a teacher specialized in deaf education. Silent Night is the second book in a mystery series about British Sign Language interpreter Paige, who works with the police on cases involving the members of the deaf community. So in the first book was called Silent House, got a lot of buzz. It's centered around a deaf family who didn't hear a thing when a crime is committed right under their roof and wake up to find that their daughter has been murdered. The second book is Silent Night, sorry about my phone, and centers around an overnight trip to a cabin in a wilderness park that is taken by a class of high school students from a school from the deaf. One snowy night, a student goes missing and a teacher goes out looking for him. When neither return, the police are called in. When the search is completed, they find the teacher murdered and the student nowhere to be found. Was the student the killer, or have they been snatched? Both books are well-plotted page turners that offer great insight into the deaf community and their struggles. So that's my list. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope you found a few new books to add to your shelves or your personal reading list.
Hello, this is Laureen Cusack speaking to you from Ampersand. I'm up next, and here's my selection of books. First up is Shiru Sakura, Falling Cherry Blossoms. In 1942, Grace Nishikihama was 8 years old when she and her family were forcibly removed from their home in Vancouver to an internment camp in BC's interior. In this moving and personal memoir, Grace reflects on that time and how it left lasting scars. Grace draws on her mother's memories, recorded for her children and grandchildren, so they would know and understand their family history. Grace also pieced together her childhood memories and added her own experience alongside her mother's story, each woman exploring how generational trauma can endure and how differently Grace and her mother interpreted those years of internment. This is an untold story, a mother and daughter's journey of two Japanese Canadian women reflecting on their history, their cultural heritage, and the meaning of home. Up next is Coming Out Again. This is a witty and empowering graphic novel with full color illustrations throughout. And these transition stories are full of love and pride. They offer some tips and advice on how to live your best life. Sabrina Symington is an illustrator, a graphic novelist, and an advocate for transgender rights. She lives in Vancouver, and she has a popular webcomic called Life of Bria. Moving on to Us Now. Us Now is an interesting and diverse collection of stories from writers born in countries from Indonesia, Taiwan, Africa, India, and points in between who have made Newfoundland their home. These are new writers, fresh new voices in CanLit, and they're writing about what it means to belong. They are by turns tender, joyous, and heart-wrenching. They confront racism and homophobia and domestic violence on one end of the spectrum and celebrate family, children, and love on the other. Lisa Moore spearheaded this anthology, and it's a paperback original. Moving on to Black Girls Take World. This is a travel Bible for Black women, and it comes at a time when we need more diversity. Perfect timing for this presentation. Georgina Lawton is a British journalist and an avid traveler who incorporates her own travel experiences in this book. The book is filled with travel tips and advice on traveling solo, staying safe, a travel hit list of world cities to visit, wildlife adventure tours, party cities, and even relaxed destinations, but most importantly, your budget. It's fun and witty. It's very stylishly put together with illustrations and inspirational quotes. The Girl with Stars in Her Eyes. This is contemporary women's fiction, and it's a unique romance story set in the world of the music industry. The main character is Antonia Bennett. Yes, that's right, Tony Bennett. She's trying to make a name for herself in Philadelphia's indie music scene. She's invited to audition for a spot in a hot new band, but little does she realize that she will have to face the man who broke her heart years before. Author Zio Axelrod grew up in the music industry and brings an insider's point of view to the story. It's also a paperback original, and it's the first in a new romance series. Of Women in Salt. This is debut author Gabriela Garcia. She's written a multi-generational family story of 5 women, beginning with Maria Isabel in 1866 and ending with her great-great-granddaughter Jeanette in 2019. The story is told in alternating voices. It begins with Maria Isabel. She's the only woman working in a Cuban cigar factory. There she meets Antonio, a co-worker who reads aloud the daily newspaper and classic literature to the factory workers. Antonio falls hard for her and he proposes marriage. He'll teach her how to read and write. He'll provide her with a home and much needed security in a time of political upheaval. Antonio belongs to a secret revolutionary group fighting for the workers' rights. And when he's killed in a raid, Isabella is left on her own with baby Cecilia. An affirmation that Maria Isabel acquires to get her through these tough times is we are the force, like we have power. And this affirmation is repeated through the generations of her female descendants. And this is where the story picks up and we're introduced to Cecilia, Dolores, Carmen, and Jeanette. Readers will sympathize with their individual journeys. They've all had personal struggles and traumas and abuse, but also talks about the loves that shape their lives. The story captures a time in history of harsh politics, revolution, immigration, addiction, and love. And Roxane Gay mentored Gabriela Garcia, and she's going to be providing a terrific endorsement for this book. The Three Mothers. This book is just starting to get some great press. So The Three Mothers is a groundbreaking historical biography of three women we know very little about, but recognize the names of their famous sons. These are men who were mavericks and leaders in the civil rights movement and became international iconic figures: Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and James Baldwin. This book celebrates Black motherhood by telling the untold story of these incredible women: Bernice Baldwin, Alberta King, and Louise Little. These women faced the prejudices of Jim Crow, yet passed down fundamental family traditions and values, words of encouragement, and pushed their children towards greatness. Anna Malika Tubbs is a scholar and advocate for women of color, and this is her debut book. And if you are a reader of Zoomer magazine, there is a terrific review in the February-March edition. Cyclopedia Exotica. Aminder Dhaliwal, she's become an in-house favorite author, and this is her new graphic novel. It's her second book with Drawn and Quarterly. She grew up in Brampton, Ontario, but now lives in Los Angeles. So Cyclopedia Exotica was initially serialized on Aminder's Instagram platform and now has been expanded to print or book format. Story captures the experiences of the Cyclops community, a largely immigrant community displaying physical differences from the majority, those people with two eyes. The Cyclops are discriminated on a daily basis. However, they are determined to fit in, find love, and be accepted and live alongside the two-eyed majority. So this book has lots of deadpan, witty humor. Butter, Honey, Pig Bread. This is perfect timing to be telling or talking about this book because it's a Canada Read finalist, and it was also longlisted for last year's Giller Prize. Francesca Ekwuyasi is a debut author. She's originally from Lagos in Nigeria, and she now lives in Halifax. This book is also a paperback original, and it's the story of motherhood, the spirit world, finding a home, food, friendship, queer love, and most importantly, forgiveness and family. Mother Kambi has been living apart from her twin daughters for several years. Kahindi fled to Montreal to escape the memories of a childhood sexual assault, and Tayi is feeling guilty for not protecting her twin sister. She moves to London where she can live as a queer woman. This is an intergenerational saga about three Nigerian women told in alternating voices. Tayi and Kahindi have returned home to Lagos to visit their mother, and it's here that the three women must face each other and address the wounds of the past if they want to reconcile and move forward and have a better future together as a happier family. Now I'm talking about coming out stories. So first off, you'll notice that the jacket cover has the rainbow colors, and it's a trade paperback original. It can be recommended to your YA reader as well as your adult reader. And it's a powerful and uplifting collection of coming out stories from LGBT people. It's based on a hugely popular coming out stories podcast from the UK, hosted and produced by the authors Emma Goswell and Sam Walker. So whether you are gay, queer, bi, trans, non-binary, or an ally, this uplifting go-to resource is filled with helpful advice and tips on what to expect and inspirational quotes from leading LGBTQ figures to help you live your very best self. My last two books, first up is the Anxiety Book for Trans People. This is a personal advice and self-help book on managing and coping with anxiety. And it's good for the trans and the non-binary person. It's written by a trans woman named Freya Benson, who admits to feeling anxious most of the time. But over the years, Freya had to address her fears and developed a toolkit for managing her anxiety as a trans person. So she explores and identifies specific triggers for trans people, such as coming out, gender dysphoria, voice anxiety, transphobia, and just general expectations. This guide will help you identify and understand your triggers and anxiety and build the resistance you need to handle life's challenges. And my last title is Quick Calm. So this is a body, mind, and spirit self-help book in paperback format. And the author recognizes that everyone has to juggle a number of responsibilities each day or even avert some type of crises at home or at work. And all of this can be so stressful and exhausting. Jennifer Wolken has written a practical guidebook designed to fit into our fast-paced lifestyle. She recommends we set aside 5 minutes each day and practice mindful meditations. This mini break will begin to show positive effects on our mind and body. She encourages us to make it a habit. And if we can do that, we'll find lasting relief from stress in our daily lives. So that's my last title. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you found some great books on my list, and I'm going to pass you over to Lahring.
Thank you, Laureen. And I'm Lahring Tribe from Penguin Random House. And it's my pleasure to share some spring and summer books with you that give a voice to traditionally underrepresented writers and share some rather less familiar perspectives. And you'll notice on the screen, in addition to the books I'm talking about, there are some read-alikes, which will be some additional titles in those areas. And as I was getting this list prepared, I was reminded, of course, that books are both mirrors and windows. So if a book tells a story about you or somebody like you, you will have the experience of seeing yourself reflected in that story. And if it's not as familiar to you, you can gain insight into and empathy for the lives and experiences of others. So I'm going to start off with Detransition Baby. Reese is a trans woman who longs for a child. She regrets the demise of her relationship with Amy, formerly James, which leaves her vulnerable to hookups with married men who treat her badly. One day her phone rings and it's Ames, formerly Amy, but now detransitioned. He conveys a startling message. His boss and lover, Katrina, is pregnant. He's responsible, but she's ambivalent about being a mother. Maybe the three of them could form an ad hoc family and raise the baby. This feels like the setup for a sitcom, but it isn't, despite a generous supply of funny lines sprinkled throughout the book. Instead, the novel explores gender and identity and parenthood through the lens of the three main characters, in a way that is simultaneously enlightening, entertaining, and eviscerating. As Goodreads reviewer LB observed, if the corrections and the object of my affection had a trans millennial baby who was jaded and twice as smart as either of her fathers, she would be this book. The Centaur's Wife. What happens if you survive the end of the world and it seems that the world is still out to destroy you? Amanda Leduc, author of Disfigured, on fairy tales, disability, and making space, explores this and much more in her second novel. As the book opens, a woman named Heather is giving birth to twin daughters when meteors crash into her city, causing massive destruction. When the survivors emerge from the rubble, only the nearby mountain offers a possible refuge. Even that's a faint hope, since its magic has always been feared, even more since Heather's father died there years ago. Interwoven with the struggle for post-apocalyptic survival are the fables Heather tells her daughters, and the beguiling story of a woman who gives birth to centaur triplets. In what could be a telling message for our times, not everyone makes it. Most of those who do make it are disabled or othered in some way. They reach out to others and function collaboratively, knowing that humans cannot survive grief or catastrophe alone. The author spins a good, weird blend of fantasy, speculative post-apocalyptic fiction, and fairy tales that turn out to be true. And this unfolds in multiple timelines, plot lines, and points of view. This striking novel, which features both beautiful writing and startling brutality, will remind many of Night Circus. How beautiful we were. I very much liked Mbolo Mbue's Behold the Dreamers, and am happy to be talking about her new novel, which is actually her first book, as it was written 2 decades ago. It is the story of a fictional African town, Kusawa, where a fictional American oil company, Pexton, has built a refinery, poisoning the soil and river and sickening the children. The town leader is complicit and the company executives promise redress, but nothing happens. They continue to tell their lies using new words until Tula, a young woman educated in America, makes it her quixotic mission to bring about change. Mbue's writing is superb. The children's chorus at the beginning and the end of the novel is absolutely haunting. Anyone interested in the impact of colonialism and the destruction of local environments and people in the pursuit of profit anywhere in the world, including our own country, will find this rewarding. The Rules of Arrangement. On a much lighter note, we have this funny, frothy, and occasionally satirical debut novel based on the author's own experiences. Zoya is a chubby, spunky young Punjabi woman with a fulfilling professional life, but so far, no suitors have come calling, and at a positively ancient 26, she is fast approaching what her family believes to be her best before date. Her matchmaking aunt roars to the rescue, whether Zoya wishes to be rescued or not. Some cringingly awkward interactions with her subtly swoon-worthy boss, the discovery of unsettling family secrets, and a couple of lively girls' nights out complicate her choice between what might be the perfect arranged marriage and the job of her dreams in New York. The Passage North. A young man back in Colombo after years abroad is his family's representative at the funeral of his grandmother's caretaker in Sri Lanka's northern province, the Tamil stronghold and site of much of the fighting during the nation's 30-year civil war. As he travels, the longing he feels for the young activist he fell in love with while living in Delhi resurfaces, and after his arrival, he hears stories that illuminate and recreate the conflict for him, a conflict that really didn't touch him personally. This deliberate, reflective novel by the author of The Story of a Brief Marriage explores love, longing, and the experience and impact of war through young eyes. This would be a perfect choice for readers or book clubs that have been binging on World War II stories who wish to broaden their horizons. China Room. The second novel from the author of the Booker shortlisted Year of the Runaways is shorter and more accessible, a compact, quick read with 2 storylines reflecting the experiences of different generations. In the 1920s, Mehar, based on the author's great-grandmother, is one of 3 young women married to 3 brothers in a community in rural India, except none of them know which brother is their husband, since their only direct contact comes when they are summoned to the darkened China Room of the title to perform their wifely duties. And their domineering mother-in-law, who runs their household with an iron fist, isn't about to tell them. Naturally, Mehar is determined to discover which of the men is her partner, a quest which has unanticipated consequences. In the contemporary timeline, a young man damaged by the racism directed at many South Asian immigrants to the UK is sent to live with extended family in India in the hope that he will recover from the malaise that grips him and the heroin addiction he has tried to keep secret. While there, he hears Mehar's story and decides to learn more of his remarkable ancestor. This novel recalls books by Rohinton Mistry or the early writings of Michael Ondaatje and has all the emotional sweep of any family saga. Genre fiction by diverse authors featuring diverse characters is still relatively uncommon, but Perfect Ruin falls neatly into the psychological thriller or domestic suspense category. Author Shanora Williams has been described as the Lisa Jewell of Miami, and here she crafts a gripping, ripping revenge fantasy. Ultra-wealthy and massively philanthropic, Lola Maxwell shines even among Miami's social elite. But years ago, she did something that destroyed Ivy Hill's family. Now in her 20s and deeply troubled, Ivy is determined to get back at Lola, first by insinuating herself into Lola's charmed circle and turning her friends against her, and then by seducing her husband. But is Ivy actually controlling the events she has set in motion? Clark and Division. My next book is a little more sedate, inspired by real history and an actual crime. As World War II was coming to an end, Japanese Americans who had been interned in camps began to be resettled, not back in their homes, but in other locations, their pre-war houses and possessions having conveniently disappeared. One resettlement community was in Chicago, in the neighborhood where Clark and Division streets cross, and that's where the Ito family will be sent after leaving the Manzanar camp. Aki's exemplary older sister Rose went ahead of the rest of her family to begin preparations for their new life. But by the time they get there, she is dead, killed by a subway train the previous day. According to the police investigation, she had recently had an abortion. But Aki finds this hard to believe of her upstanding sibling, and she persists in her quest to find out what really happened, despite the racism she encounters in official places. This involving novel occupies the intersection between mystery and historical fiction and will appeal to readers of both. Naomi Hirahara, whom you may know for The Summer of the Big Bachi and the other books in the Masarai series, has won many awards for crime fiction, including an Edgar, and she is a well-known Japanese-American archivist and oral historian. The Mismatch. From the cover and basic plot summary, a sheltered young British and Iranian Muslim woman decides to sample life after finishing university, so she picks a quintessentially English boy to give her her first kiss, knowing she will never fall for anyone so different. From all of that, I was expecting a fluffy rom-com complete with cute intercultural misunderstandings and a happy ending, but this debut has much more substance than that. And not only because rugby-playing Magnus's father displays concerning similarities to Soraya's father. As their tentative romance develops, Soraya knows she is playing with fire. Her older sister was kicked out of the family after she turned up with an English boyfriend a decade and a half ago. Soraya's father has not thrived as an immigrant, and his unhappiness has infected his relationships with his wife and children, who are trying to navigate between their culture of origin and the broader society in which they now live. Over time, the cracks in her family become increasingly apparent, making an already challenging situation even more complicated. Yes, there will be the requisite heartbreak and a cringeworthy date or two, but there is only so much rom, and the com is more accurately described as commentary than comedy. And as readers wait to see if Soraya and Magnus will get together, they will observe her finding her voice in another utterly satisfying way. Probably Ruby. Ruby is a 40-ish Métis woman with 2 sons. As a baby, she was adopted as a consolation prize by a Caucasian couple who, in the thinking of the time, didn't tick enough boxes to qualify for a white baby. As an adult, Ruby struggles with monogamy, drinks too much, and fantasizes about her therapist. Determined to make a change, she gets in touch with her Métis family to help create an indigenous identity for her sons, even before she understands her own heritage. These stories, which connect into a novel in the same way as Elizabeth Strout brings all of Kittredge to life, are told from the points of view of Ruby, her birth father and mother, and her Cree and Métis grandparents. As with Strout, the narrative doesn't unfold chronologically, but by the end, all the pieces come together. Lisa Bird Wilson's mentor, Len Cariou, describes her as a Métis Alice Munro. The Snow Line. Tessa McWatt wrote this novel as she was penning her insightful anatomy of race, Shame on Me. It's about 4 guests, 3 young and 1 old, who've been invited to a wedding in India. This has been the premise for multiple fluffy rom-coms, but that's not what this is. Against all probability, Rima, mixed race and newly pregnant, her relationship with her Scottish boyfriend in doubt, connects with elderly Jackson, frail, oblivious, and white, and carrying his wife's ashes, which he wants to scatter in the mountains. To do this, he will need the help of younger people, but it's not just about him. He also remembers a time when he failed to help a young woman whom Rima resembles, and feels that this may be his chance to repay that old debt. After the wedding, Yash and Monica join Rima and Jackson in the trek to the mountains, forming a temporary family as they deal with racial and cultural identity, the aftermath of colonialism, grief, loneliness, and guilt. And now for a couple of nonfiction titles, starting with Can You Hear Me Now? In this provocative debut that blends memoir and inspiration, the author writes partly about politics and race, and more about finding her voice and learning to love how she looked, enduring painful experiences like academic annihilation and beatings along the way. Selena Caesar Chavan, who ran successfully in the Whitby, Ontario riding on a platform of inclusion, challenged Justin Trudeau over his claim that his cabinet looked like Canada and told Maxime Bernier to check his privilege. Feeling that her role was more of a token representative than a game changer, she left the Liberals in 2019 to sit as an independent and didn't run again, but she continues to speak out to inspire and empower Canadian women of color. This book will appeal to teenage as well as adult readers. Queer Love in Color. The creator of this collection of photographs and stories depicting queer couples of color explains in his moving introduction why it is so inclusive of all gender identities, races, and ages. He says that as a young Black man, he had never seen people of color represented as gay and didn't know it was even an option. This heartwarming, beautifully photographed book very deliberately includes people of all ages and body types. Lots of wrinkles and long-term relationships are depicted, as he also seeks to avoid the young and beautiful gay stereotype. And my final book is All the Rage by Brad Fraser. Brad Fraser is an acclaimed Canadian playwright whose career started with Wolf Boy. Historical note, Keanu Reeves played the leading role when it debuted in Edmonton in 1981. Before that, Fraser endured an abusive and impoverished childhood with teenage parents utterly unequipped for the task. Even as he started to be recognized as a writer of promise in Canada's evolving theater scene, his abrasive temperament led to conflict, exacerbated by prejudice against his sexual orientation. His experience of coming of age as a gay man during the AIDS era is a story rarely told from a Canadian perspective. And that's my list. I hope you find some books that you will enjoy reading personally or recommending to others. And now over to Margot.
Thank you, Lahring. I also focused a bit on some genre fiction as well as a lot of debut authors for this presentation. So represent these titles. The first one I will begin with is Creatures of Passage. So this comes from one of my publishers in New York called Akashic Books, and their tagline is reverse gentrification of the literary world. And this is the second novel by Margot. Her first book was Time of the Locust. It was a big library book in the US, finalist for the Penn Bellwether Prize and also an NAACP Image Award winner. This book is now drawing comparisons to Toni Morrison's Beloved. It's a ghost story and it's a very scary thriller. It takes place primarily in the late 1970s in Washington, DC, in the Capitol, so very timely setting. And the Capitol is reimagined as an enchanted land populated by changelings, phantoms, waking nightmares, and at least one haunted car, very spooky. Ms. Magazine listed this as one of the best books of winter 2021. So it's delayed from what I have on the slide, and called it hauntingly magical. It centers on a young woman dealing with the loss of her brother and it's a very imaginative thriller. The Kirkus starred review and also listed it as a most anticipated book of 2021. Said in its review, the historic detail and mythic folklore forges scary, thrilling vision of life along America's margins. My next title is Milk, Blood, Heat. And about 8 or 10 months ago in our sales conference, one of my favorite editors from Grove Atlantic was presenting this title and suggested we watch closely this author. So at the time while I was in sales conference, I found her on Instagram, one of her first few followers as she started to promote her book. And it's been just an absolute joy to watch the kind of publicity that she's getting. Library Journal calls this highly recommended and says, catch this writer early in her game. It's a powerful debut collection of stories, and it's a wonderland of deep female characters navigating their lives against the ever-changeable backdrop of Florida. It's dark and lushly layered, and these stories will bewitch you. Many recommended lists, including it's the April pick for Roxane Gay's Audacious Book Club, and Indie Next Best Pick, Time Magazine, Oprah, Elle are all recommending this book. So watch Dan Teal. My next title, also from Akashic Books, is A River Called Time. And Akashic is also Marlon James' first publisher. They find wonderful writers, and this one is a speculative fiction set in parallel Londons. A River Called Time is a reimagining of the African diaspora's influence on England and the rest of the world. So Newland gives his dystopia a spin by making it an alternate history. And in this world, European interactions with Africa, stretching back to ancient Egypt, were treated as opportunities to learn and mingle and not to exploit or to enslave. And as a result, magical African abilities, squashed by the horrors of colonialism, have flourished, becoming a kind of world religion. The novel asks, what glory and influence would Africa enjoy if colonialism had never occurred? The author reshapes our vision of the past, present, and future by taking this one question very seriously. The result is something truly special. PW's recent review says it's very skillfully handled and is sure to please fans of thought-provoking speculative fiction. My next title is Young Blood, and this comes from Catalyst Press, which is a publisher in South Africa. It's a very gritty novel. It has won the Wole Soyinka Prize for Literature in Africa and is one of Crime Read's most anticipated books of 2021. So taking the opportunity here again to introduce a debut writer. So Sifiso is a very young writer in South Africa, and this is a coming of age story. Cars, money, girls, this is what you need to get ahead in this township where the story takes place, Umlazi, which is in the outskirts of Durban in South Africa. So the main character, Sifo, is a 17-year-old who drops out of high school and joins a car hijacking syndicate to make a name for himself and to escape his family's low-income life. Along with his hijacking partners, Sifo learns the tricks of the dangerous trade and pushes deeper into the underbelly of their neighborhood in the township, and under the guidance of a gang leader, Sibani, while partying heavily. So Young Blood is the story of the intricate balance of circumstance and choice, swift gain and incredible loss. So it's both a red-hot crime novel of car heists and rival gangs, but it's also a coming-of-age story of a teenager navigating the costs of a fast life. The novel reveals the devastating violence, but at the same time, the raw beauty of life in South Africa's townships. All kinds of interesting authors coming forward to blurb this novel, including Paul Harding, the Pulitzer Prize winning author of Tinkers. My next novel is Open Water, and this is an incredible sensation this spring here in North America. It was published last season to massive amounts of praise in the UK by Penguin UK. So this is a big acquisition for Grove Atlantic to become the North American publisher for Open Water. Again, debut novel, and it's a stunner. So introducing 26-year-old writer and photographer Caleb Azuma Nelson, who was discovered as he was a finalist for the BBC Short Story Award. So his novel takes place in a crowded London pub where two young people meet. Both are Black British, both won scholarships to private schools where they struggled to belong, and both are artists. He, a photographer, and she, a dancer. And they are both trying to make their mark in a world that by turns celebrates and at the same time rejects them. They fall in love. But two people who seem destined to be together can still be torn apart by fear and violence. And over the course of a year, they find their relationship tested by forces beyond their control. It's a beautiful love story and a potent look into race and masculinity. The reviews are incredibly beautiful, gorgeous, soulful intensity, blistering emotional intelligence, profoundly sensitive, a portrait of romantic love. And clearly, this is one of the most essential debut novels of recent years. My next novel is not a debut writer, but maybe somewhat underrepresented writer. I have always loved the novels of Sabina Murray. She has judged major literary awards like the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award. Her last novel was Valiant Gentleman, which was a New York Times 100 Notable Books, makes all the best of lists, but seems to be rather unread. So this novel follows a Filipino-American woman, a journalist, who returns to the dictatorship-ruled Manila to research book she's writing on tribes. So this is a return to Sabina's subject matter of her debut, which was Slow Burn, which centered on the Marcos regime. This time, this literary novel is focusing on the current dictatorship of Duterte. Murray also focuses on her writing often on Philippine life. She's a Philippine American. So this novel takes into the historical account and writes about through the research of the human zoos, which exported Filipino tribesmen to the USA for display at the start of the 20th century. So this is a perfect recommendation for readers of politically driven fiction with characters between two cultures. And this wonderful book, The Committed, just shipped last week, and this would be a great comp for The Human Zoo. My next novel is Hard Like Water. So again, at one of our sales conferences, the editor from Grove Atlantic called Jan Leonke an author's author, which to me does not invite me to want to read the book. I find it has an intimidating ring to it. So it's taking me a while to get around to reading Jan Leonke, and I finally did, and I think he's actually a reader's author. This novel was named a most anticipated book by The Guardian and by Book Riot, and there's been much praise for Jan Leonke over the years. He was the winner of the Franz Kafka Prize and a two-time finalist for the Man Booker International Prize. So this is an author and a voice that we really need to listen to. His work is highly satirical, which has resulted in some of his most renowned works being banned in China. But there is a big surge of interest in his work. The New Yorker recently did a large profile on Leonke, and he was on the weekend edition on NPR. And the New York Times Book Review raved that Jan's subject is China, but he has condensed the human forces driving today's global upheavals into a bracing universal vision. His previous book, The Day the Sun Died, has been optioned for a film by Plan B Entertainment, Brad Pitt's production company. So here we have Hard Like Water, and Lianqi returns to fiction in a novel that is a powerful interrogation of the politics in China, as well as a comic and moving love story of two revolutionaries. So he's returning to his best known and best-selling novel material, Serve the People. My next novel is The Seed Keeper by Diane Wilson. And this has made a most anticipated debut for Spring List with Ms. Magazine, PW, and several other lists. So Diane Wilson uses both the concept and the reality of seeds to explore the story of her Dakota heritage, as well as her protagonist, who's Dakota, Rosalie Ironwing. The main character is a displaced daughter of a former science teacher and the widow of a white farmer. And she's grappling with her understanding of identity and community in the face of loss and trauma. The Seed Keeper tells the story through a chorus of female voices, four main narratives: Rosalie, her great aunt Darlene Killsbear, her best friend Gaby Makepeace, and her ancestor Marie Blackbird, who in 1862, with great risk to herself, saved her own mother's seeds. So with that, Wilson layers in the shifts in white mass agriculture, from working on the farm, the hybrid seeds, the chemical fertilizers and new equipment that exhaust the soil, harm the people working the soil, and pollute the rivers and the groundwater. The author, Diane Wilson, is executive director for the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance. This is her debut, and it's beautiful. The characters and voices will stay with you long after you finish this book, and it's from the publisher of Braiding Sweetgrass from Milkweed Editions. So moving into a few nonfiction titles, hashtag Say Her Name. This book is an essential read and incredibly timely. It reflects years of organizing and work and is an important contribution to the rebellions of today. So recent outrage and organizing around Breonna Taylor's murder by the Louisville police has become a rallying cry in the WNBA, the NBA, the cover of Vanity Fair, and elsewhere. The author is Kimberlé Crenshaw, one of the most prominent contemporary Black feminist theorists, and her work on intersectionality and critical race theory are foundational. The hashtag Say Her Name campaign brings awareness to the often invisible names and stories of Black women and Black girls who have been victimized by racist police violence and provides support to their family. Kerry Washington is supporting the book and campaign and recently went on Jimmy Kimmel to talk about this movement, the book, to a national audience, and there's much more publicity to come for this. All the Young Men is my next nonfiction. So this deeply moving memoir honors a segment of society underrepresented, the men who fought for their lives with AIDS during a most hostile and misinformed time. This is told by Ruth Coker Burks, who at the time, in the Reagan years, was a young single mother in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And she finds herself driven to the forefront of the AIDS crisis. She becomes a political activist in the fight against AIDS. The Starred Library Journal review says this is a powerful memoir. Burke's spirited, straightforward prose balances the heartbreak of her story with just enough humor and toughness. It's a must-read for everyone interested in narratives of frontline responses to the AIDS crisis, as well as personal accounts of kindness and of determination. My next nonfiction is Black Box, published by the Feminist Press. This was an internationally recognized sexual assault memoir that revolutionized the feminist movement around rape, stigma, and silence in Japan. Ito herself is a member of the group of people collectively referred to as the Silence Breakers, who made their the cover of Time magazine's Persons of the Year. The rapist in this memoir is Noriyuki Yamaguchi. He was accused, she accused the former Washington bureau chief, from Tokyo Broadcasting System of something in Japanese law called quasi-rape. Quasi-rape is a term that refers to having sex with a woman by taking advantage of loss of consciousness or inability to resist. Shiori Ito was told the case wasn't worth pursuing. Convictions were rare, and speaking out would damage not only herself and her career, but also the lives of her family members. The easier option would be to just drop the claim, take the compensation money, and never speak about what happened again. But for this young freelance journalist, that simply wasn't an option. As international outlets covered every step of her story, even documenting it in the BBC film Japan's Secret Shame, this book launched a societal reckoning, and at the end of 2019, Ito won a civil case against Yamaguchi. With careful and quiet fury, Black Box recounts a broken system of repression and violence, but it also heralds the beginning of a new solidarity movement seeking a more equitable path toward justice for Japanese women. My final book is Stories of Métis Women, important and unique perspective about the Métis as people, how they have survived as people, how they carry on and thrive as people. And this perspective is shared through the writings of the daughters, mothers, aunties, and grandmothers of the Métis, and also includes stories that have been passed down through families. The book and accompanying documentary is a collection of stories, culture, history, and nationhood as told by the women. The Métis are known by many names, and they are known also as the forgotten people, and few really know their story. So in this era of reconciliation, Stories of Métis Women explains the story of the Métis Nation from their own perspective. The UN has declared this the Decade of Indigenous Languages, and Stories is one of the few books available in English and Michif, which is an endangered language. APN has placed this title on must-reads for 2021. And that's my presentation of titles I would love you to represent. Thank you, and I'll pass this over to Tim.
Thank you, Margot. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks again for joining us. I'm Tim Gain from Canadian Manda Group, and the first book on my list of titles is Light Seekers. Excuse me. This is an Own Voices BIPOC debut thriller that's written by a clinical psychologist who has gone on to writing several popular primetime television shows. It's a standalone for now, but it does have very strong series potential and is somewhat in the vein of My Sister, the Serial Killer. It's set in modern Nigeria and is at its heart about the clash between rural and urban in contemporary society. The main character is a respected doctor, newly returned from the US, and who is now viewed as an outsider within his own country. He is tasked with helping to investigate the public torture and murder of 3 university students in a remote part of the country. But he meets resistance at all levels, from local officials down to the townsfolk, and therefore finds himself increasingly reliant on the skills and connections of his local driver. African authors have been ones to watch recently, and I think Femi Coyote is definitely one that we are going to see more fantastic books from in the future. Then the next title on my list is What's Mine and Yours. This is a timely novel and is the author's follow-up to her highly acclaimed debut Halsey Street that was a finalist for the Kirkus Prize for Fiction in 2018. It's a sweeping novel of legacy, identity, family, and the ways that race affects even our most intimate relationships. And it asks the question, what do you hand down to the next generations in a family in a country that's still haunted by its violent legacy? The novel is about 2 generations and is set in 2 different time periods and has 2 different families, one Black and one white. But the white is only a little more white than a Latino family. Both of these families are headed by single mothers and both live in a small town in North Carolina. So Jade is the African-American mother. She's a single mom raising her son Guy, who was a small child, saw the man he knew as his father murdered in front of him. Lacey May is the other single mother. She's raising 3 girls, Noelle, Margarita, and Diane, after their father is sent to prison. Both of these mothers struggle to improve the prospects for their children, which leads to a fight over the integration of a local high school. And that is made even more complicated by the developing relationship between Guy and Noelle. Then next up is Saraland. This book is a debut Own Voices collection of short stories, all with first-person narratives by a different main queer character named Sarah. Some of the stories are quirky, some are odd, some cases even bizarre, but all are candid, thought-provoking, and moving. The stories are set between biblical times and the present day, culture, folklore, sexuality, and gender. And following that is We Are Eliza Bright. This is another timely debut novel, and it is set within the modern tech world and is a Me Too era thriller based on the Gamergate scandal and partially on the author's own personal experiences with the gaming communities and reporting on the story as it was happening. So the main character is Eliza, who has risen to the rank of an elite video game coder within her company. She's the first female to do so. That gains her more respect among the other female employees and amongst her friends, but immediately she begins to be perceived as a threat to her male colleagues and to their games that they love. And after Eliza reports an incident of workplace harassment, she is fired, excuse me, and then doxxed. She becomes a hero to other women, but at the same time, it becomes the target of a vicious male video game fanatic who is determined to punish her. And that is followed by something a little bit lighter, which is Accidentally Engaged. This is Toronto author Farah Heron's follow-up to her 2019 debut, The Chai Factor, which, if I'm remembering correctly, was a pick by Rosalyn at the time. The book is an Own Voices contemporary rom-com that the editor described at sales conference as being like the Great British Bake Off meets My Big Fat Greek Wedding, but with South Asian Muslim characters. The protagonist is a 30-year-old woman named Rena. She's an amazing cook, and she once upon a time was a successful food blogger until that career was sabotaged by her own younger sister. Mina now hates her current job in the financial world. She's also annoyed with the nonstop intrusions and prying of her family. She wants to be independent and to be able to make decisions without needing her family's approval. Then when a very attractive and flirty new neighbor named Nadim moves into her building, Rena can hardly resist his charms. But then she learns that he is the arranged husband that her parents expect her to marry. And she's not having it at all. Until there comes a time where she'll need Nadim's help. Then that is followed by This Close to Okay. So this is a second novel from a quickly rising Southern literary African-American author. Her short story collection, So We Can Glow, from a few seasons ago, has been nominated for the 2021 Joyce Carol Oates Prize. And Roxane Gay is a huge fan of Lisa, calling her a consummate storyteller. So the book has 2 main characters, one of whom is Tally, a recently divorced therapist who is driving home from work one evening when she sees a man standing on the wrong side of a bridge railing. After some persuading, she convinces him to leave the bridge and chat with her over a cup of coffee. This man's name is Emmett, and he is the other main character in the novel. Tally wants to make sure Emmett is safe and tries to determine what made him think that suicide was the answer. So as they spend a long weekend together, the two learn a lot about each other, and Tally will realize that while she is helping Emmett through some of his issues, that he is helping her with some of her own as well. So the book touches on several heavy subjects, but it is also very moving and does end, hopefully. Then that is followed by Son of the Storm. So this is a thrilling first installment in what will be a new epic quest fantasy trilogy written by a young Nigerian author with the settings and storyline inspired by West African landscapes and folklore. There are three main characters in the book. The first is Danso, who is a disillusioned young scholar who is looked down on for being mixed race and who is constantly being chided by his older male relatives for bringing dishonor on their family. The second is Ashime, who is a feisty, ambitious young woman who is Danso's intended, but who wants more in life than what her mother and family have planned for her. And at no point is she ever anywhere near a damsel in distress character. Then the third protagonist is Laureen, who is a yellow skin, and according to the beliefs of Danso and Ashime's culture, shouldn't even exist. Laureen comes from a mythical land on a mission to retrieve something powerful and magical, and which could change the fate of the world. The next on my list is Book of Wings, which is the first of a few titles from Canadian authors. This one is a debut novel from an established poet from Montreal. The protagonist is a woman named Maya, who's still yearning for her still beloved former partner, Shams. Maya has turned inward and away from the tragedy she experienced of a love gone cold. The two had embarked on a trip around the world from Vancouver with much excitement, only to have the relationship completely come apart while they were in Paris. So Maya then continues the journey alone, and as she does, she tries to overcome her heartbreak, put the past to rest, reclaim herself, and chart a new path. So while at times the book is somewhat painful, it will leave readers feeling both uplifted and inspired. Then the next two books on my list, His Sacred Army and A Time of Questions, I'll talk about partially together and partially separate. So these two books are the first English translations of the first two books in a 5-book series of epic historical novels written by a Tamil author several years ago while he lived in Sri Lanka, but he has since moved to Canada. The series tells the story of the growth of the armed struggle in Sri Lanka in the 80s and depicts the suffering and separations caused by the political exploitation of ethnic differences that led to full-fledged civil war. So the first book, His Sacred Army, centers around the life of a young woman, Rajalakshmi, who lives on a small island off the coast and who has the simple dream of gaining employment to support her struggling family, while her husband struggles to decide whether to follow his father's political path of constitutional reform or to join the growing separatist movement. And then the second book, A Time of Questions, explores the disenfranchisement of Tamil youth in the face of growing Sinhala Buddhist nationalism, and has Rajalakshmi facing two options, whether to remain on her beloved little island or to seek refuge for her family in India. And then the final few titles on my list are a few nonfiction titles, starting with The New Age of Empire. This is the latest book from an influential UK university professor who founded that country's first undergraduate degree in Black Studies. The book is a sharp, provocative, and at times scathing re-examination of the history of imperialism, slavery, and genocide, and their role in the development of Western political and economic systems. It argues that a lot of the economic benefits that we have today rest on colonialism and slavery, and that while white supremacy continues to be embedded in these systems, it will continue to negatively impact the lives of people of color in the modern day. And the book does not shy away from laying blame at some of the world's biggest and most influential organizations, including the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the United Nations. And it also doesn't shy away from calling for a passionate but peaceful revolution. Then next up is This Is the Fire. So this is a new book from Don Lemon, CNN's very popular weeknight primetime host. And it begins with a heartfelt letter written to his nephew expressing Lemon's outrage over the murder of George Floyd. and then tying that event back to the family's personal history as descendants of slaves. And what follows from there is a very conversational narrative detailing the US's history of institutional racism and white supremacy, its recent resurgence, and Lemon's personal experiences over the years, covering all of the biggest news stories, especially the rise, election, and policies of Donald Trump. Then my final title on the list is You'll Never Believe What Happened to Lacey. This is the first book written by Amber Ruffin. She was the very first Black woman to become a head writer for a late night show, and her segments on Late Night with Seth Meyers are incredibly popular and always go viral. The book is written as a dialogue between Amber and her sister Lacey, and is based on actual phone calls that they have had over the years, often about the persistent racism that they have faced. Lacey still lives in their hometown of Omaha, Nebraska, where she still experiences racism much more often than Amber, who lives in New York City. The book's very accessible, quite funny at times, but obviously also quite disturbing as well. So thank you very much. That's the end of my list.
Great. So thanks everyone for joining us today. I do hope you enjoyed our presentation. If you haven't registered for tomorrow's event, there's still time to do so. Just a reminder, we will be sending out a follow-up email today, right after we end this, with links to the PDF handout and the hot list. Thanks again to the Dewey Divas and Dude for putting this together. Talk to you guys soon. Stay safe, stay connected.